Hello, I'm Dr. Bridget Nash, and I'd like to welcome you to The Therapy Show, a podcast series that seeks to demystify mental health treatment. Today, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Richard Schwartz, who earned his doctorate in marriage and family therapy from Purdue University. Dr. Schwartz created the therapeutic model, Internal Family Systems. He is also the founder of the Center for Self-Leadership, where professionals and the general public can attend workshops and trainings. Dr. Schwartz is the co-author of the book Family Therapy, Concepts and Methods, which is the most widely used family therapy text in the United States. He is also the author of the Introduction to the Internal Family Systems Model, as well as an amazing audiobook, Greater Than the Sum of Our Parts, Discovering Your True Self Through Internal Family Systems Therapy. This audiobook uses an experiential approach to understanding internal family systems. Dr. Schwartz, welcome to The Therapy Show.
Thank you, Bridget. It's a pleasure.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about your personal background and professional development that led you to create internal family systems therapy?
I come from a medical family, and I didn't have a head for hard science, so I was a kind of failure at that. But I still had this drive to help people and got interested in therapy and was an aide on a psychiatric unit for many years. It was an adolescent unit. So I would watch these kids in their therapy sessions, which were psychoanalytic, where they wouldn't be talking at all about what was happening in their external lives and their family dynamics. And then I would be with them on weekends when the families would visit, and I would see how the families would shame them and attack them in various ways that was clearly related to their symptoms. And so I began thinking there has to be a better way to do this. And as a result, got interested in family therapy, which this was about 1970 something, 75 maybe. And it was a very new field at the time. So I found a doctoral program in that. There weren't many of them, but I went to Purdue and got a doctorate in family therapy. And I was one of those zealous family therapists that thought we'd found the Holy Grail and that this approach to working with psychology would revolutionize everything. And to some degree, that was true. But my efforts to prove it, I got a job at a research institute in Chicago about 1980, decided to do an outcome study with bulimia, which was a very new syndrome at the time, and gathered together 30 bulimic kids and their families with a colleague named Mary Jo Barrett, and tried to prove that this family therapy could do most everything. And unfortunately, my clients didn't cooperate. And so out of frustration, I began asking them questions about what was happening inside of them that kept them going, even though we had reorganized the families just the way the book said to do it. And they started talking about these, what they called parts, these different parts of them. They would say, when something bad happened in my life, this critic would attack me inside and call me names. And then that would bring up a part that felt totally worthless and empty and alone. And then that was so distressing to be in that state that almost to the rescue would come a binge part that would take me out of my body and get me away from the pain of that. But then the critic would come back and attack me for binging, and then that would bring back that worthless part. So they were in a kind of vicious circle that sounded familiar to me as a family therapist, these escalating sequences of interaction among different members. In this case, they were internal family members. And so I began applying family therapy technique and systems ideas to this inner system that I was learning about. So that was the inception of it. And again, that was about 35 years ago. And thing has sort of taken over my life.
So how would you briefly explain internal family systems to a non-professional?
If anybody's seen the movie Inside Out, that's a good depiction of what we call parts. If something's happening in your life, you're facing some kind of dilemma, most everybody will be aware that there's a voice that's urging you to do it and another voice that's very cautionary inside, telling you it's too scary, don't do it. And for us, those are just examples of two different, in other systems are called subpersonalities, that will battle constantly inside of us around different things. And then there are other kinds of parts that, for example, parts that scan for danger, or parts that want you to take care of everybody, and then they get polarized with the parts that want you to have a life of your own, and so on. So we have all these inner conflicts, and they aren't just, it turns out, if you actually focus on them, they aren't just ephemeral thoughts and emotions, but they're emanating from these little inner personalities. And we call them parts because that's what clients call them. It's the most user-friendly word. And that is how we live our lives. That's what we call thinking, is usually a dialogue among these different parts about what to do next. So as I learned about that, and some of them, again, caused trouble in our lives and seemed quite destructive, I got curious about all of that, and it turns out that we all have them. It's the nature of the mind to be subdivided that way. It's natural to be a multiple personality in that sense, that people with that diagnosis of multiple personality disorder are no different than everybody else, except that theirs got exploded by this horrible trauma they suffered, but that we all have these inner personalities. And the other side of the model that I just stumbled into, which has become kind of the centerpiece, is that as these inner personalities calm down and stop their conflicts and open space inside and relax, there's this other essence of us that emerges spontaneously that I call the self, that has all these wonderful leadership qualities, and like also has a wisdom about how to relate to these parts in such a way that they actually transform and heal. That's in everybody also, and it can't be damaged. In other spiritual systems, it's got various names like the soul, or Buddha nature in Buddhism, or Atman in Hinduism, or virtually every spiritual tradition has a word for it. Almost no psychologies do. But I found a way to access that in people very quickly. So when I'm working with somebody, I'll start by accessing their self and then have the self do the interaction with the parts. Often clients will do it on their own. They'll basically be able to step back and be quiet while they're actually having these inner dialogues that are quite healing.
And can you explain a little bit about managers, firefighters, and exiles?
As I was exploring all this, I'm a systems thinker, and so I was looking for a way to categorize these parts. So I was looking for distinctions among them, and the primary distinction that leaped out back then, is held up as the primary one, was between parts that are very vulnerable, what often is called the inner children, and get hurt by traumas and the bad things that happen in our families, and shift. When they're not hurt, they're usually these delightful inner children that give us a sense of curiosity and creativity and awe at the world. But when they get hurt, they get what we call the burden of pain or shame or terror that attaches to them, and we don't want to have to experience them anymore. And so we lock them up inside, some form, try to stay away from all of that. So we call those exiles. The act of exiling them actually is hurtful to them too. So it's sort of like insult to injury. The injury was the original pain of the trauma, and then they're insulted by being abandoned by us and locked up. And we try to move on in our lives and leave all that. And we think we're leaving behind just the memory, sensations, emotions, and beliefs from the trauma, not knowing that we're actually abandoning our most playful, delicious parts. When you get a bunch of exiles, then life becomes a lot more precarious, because anything can trigger them. And when they get triggered, their flames of emotion can overwhelm you and take you back into those bad times and incapacitate you. So to deal with that, there's a set of protective parts that try to manage your life so that you don't get triggered and try to control everything. And so we call those managers. That's the role they get stuck in. They also might try to make you take care of everybody so that they don't reject you, or they'll become the critics who will blast you if you make a mistake, or try to goad you into looking perfect, performing well. So these parts are on duty all the time and just trying to get us through life by keeping the exiles locked away and at bay, not having them come out and be triggered. But the world has a way of breaking through those defenses and triggering your exiles so that another set of parts you need to immediately go into action in an impulsive way to get you away from that pain or shame or terror, those flames of emotion that are encompassing you. And so we call them firefighters. They're fighting those fire of the exile's feelings. And they'll do it in, as I say, impulsive or extreme ways, often to get you higher than the flames or to distract you until they burn themselves out, to get you out of your body. And some of those firefighter activities are what we call addictions, or the kinds of things that can screw up your life. And so then you attack yourself. Your managers attack you for the firefighter activity, and then that makes the exile feel worse, and so on and so on. So anyway, that's the system. Those categories don't describe the parts themselves. They describe the roles they're forced into when people get hurt. And my contention is that all the parts, when released from these roles, are valuable and transform into their naturally valuable states. Those are the parts that we work with, but they're separate from the self. The self is a whole different kind of essence that blends with them so that you're not even aware of this self in there. But as they open space, as they separate, self comes forward.
So when and how did you realize that internal family systems would be an effective new form of therapeutic intervention?
I got the big picture pretty early. As I was doing this and experimenting, and I would try getting these parts to open space, to step back in our language with different clients, and the self would emerge in these different clients. And these were clients with pretty dreadful histories, where according to other theories, like attachment theory, the clients would have no business having these kinds of strengths because they had horrible parenting. But I was finding that it was like the same person would emerge and would have what we call the 8 C's of self-leadership, which include curiosity, calm, compassion, confidence, creativity, courage, clarity, and connectedness, would have some version of those qualities spontaneously just by having these parts give space inside. And it was the same person in all these clients that clearly hadn't been damaged at all. So when I got that, and that might have been 1984, somewhere around there, I saw the potential of this, because if this turned out to be true, if this is who we really are, and it can be accessed this quickly, that would change everything, not only in psychotherapy, but in all kinds of human endeavor. And it turns out it is true. And so 35 years later, people are starting to catch on to that. It's been a long selling job and long haul for me, but it does change everything. But I got the big picture of it early on, like I'm saying, and the idea that these parts aren't what they seem, and they can and they want to transform, and they're all valuable. All of that I got pretty early. And then I was thinking, boy, I hope somebody comes along who can take this where it's supposed to go. Because I'm just a little kid. At the time I was maybe 33, 34, and not all that mature. And I was still waiting for that person. So it turns out it had to be me. And I've had to work on myself to try and grow into that role.
Who is internal family systems most effective for, and why should people choose an internal family systems intervention?
Well, we use it with virtually every sort of diagnostic category. There are some contraindications, but they don't have to do with the diagnosis. They're much more around the safety of the client's external world and so on, things like that. So I just presented at our annual conference, for example, on IFS and schizophrenia, where what people have thought have been these voices are really just parts that are in extreme roles. If you, instead of fighting them or trying to medicate them out of existence, you listen to them and help them calm down, then people with that diagnosis do a lot better. It's therapy that seems to work well for most syndromes. We have studied it with with rheumatoid arthritis. So it works also with many medical kinds of issues, because the arthritis patients, not only did they feel less depressed and anxious, but the physical manifestation of their arthritis got much better, to the point where some went into complete remission. And we've also now studied it with PTSD and had quite amazing outcome. Probably the best outcome anybody's gotten so far on a pilot study with only 13 patients. And we work with a lot of people with kind of garden variety neuroses too.
I would think that somebody with a medical condition and pain, that's the body trying to tell them something or speak to them in a way.
Well, I would phrase it a little differently. So in my system, the body itself isn't really talking. The body is just the body. But our parts will use the body to try and get messages through to us, or to try and screw our body up so that because they're angry at us, because we're not listening to them. So that's what we found with the arthritis patients. When we had them focus on their pain and get curious about it rather than hate it, and ask the pain itself questions, the parts that were using the pain would do the answering. And the answers were usually, the profile of the arthritis clients, this was at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, were Irish Catholic mothers who had these massive caretaking parts that wouldn't ever let them take care of themselves. And so when we had them focus on the pain and listen to it, they were hearing about that, and they were hearing how angry these parts were that they never did take care of themselves. And as we worked that out, so there was more space for these assertive parts to have in their lives, the arthritis got hugely better. From my perspective, when parts aren't listened to, there aren't that many things they can do about it. But one thing they can do is find whatever medical conditions you have and exacerbate those, or even start new ones.
How can a client know if their therapist is proficient in IFS?
We do certify IFS therapists, which means they've gone through a certain level of our training and then submitted a video to show that they know what they're doing and had some supervision. So there's a directory on our website, which is selfleadership.org, that has the names of everybody who's been through the trainings, and then there's whether they're certified or not. So that's, I think, probably the best way. But also, if you're seeing somebody who calls themselves an IFS therapist, you should sense their self. So a lot of the training involves helping therapists access this place of compassion and curiosity and calm and so on. And if you don't sense that, then they're not real. If you sense them being in anxious parts or judgmental parts or anything like that, then they're not doing good IFS.
That makes sense. So what's the average length of treatment for somebody seeing an internal family systems therapist?
Well, there's an enormous range. A lot just depends on the chronicity of their abuse or their backgrounds. So the PTSD study, for example, it was 13 clients, each got 16 sessions, I believe. And by the end of it, only one client still qualified for having PTSD. So they got better in terms of the symptoms very quickly, but many of them kept going because even though they were functioning better, they still knew they had lots to heal in terms of parts stuck in the past in various dreadful places. And that we're good at that. We just keep going. So it can go from like 16 sessions or even less if it's one specific kind of issue to, there are clients that I'm still seeing after several years, but they had horrific abuse in their lives, like on a daily basis. And they're increasingly doing better, but there's still lots more to do. And so this is a very healing kind of enterprise. It's not, let's just get to know these parts and be nice to them. Let's instead go to them, get them out of where they're stuck in the past, unload the burdens of feeling and belief they carry, and help them transform. And so we'll go as long as clients want to. And I have clients that'll do a piece of work for several weeks and then take a break and then come back. And so I'm still working on parts of me, and I've been at this 30-some years. And I'm in my second marriage, and my wife helps me access a whole new set of parts that I didn't know were there.
What skills, habits, or tactics can patients and therapists adopt either during their sessions or in between sessions to improve the effectiveness of internal family systems therapy?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things I like best about IFS is that it's so empowering because it isn't just the 60 minutes in the session that people do the work. So most people, it becomes very clear to them how to work with their parts between sessions on their own. And we have homework assignments along those lines. So I have clients who the first 20 minutes of our session, they're just filling me in on everything they've been doing during the week with their parts. And then we go in and do some more, and then they go off and keep going. And so many people, it becomes more of a life practice than a psychotherapy, incorporated into their meditations and so on.
What are the most common obstacles or missteps that prevent therapists and patients alike from seeing the full benefits of internal family systems?
Like I said, if the therapist isn't in self and their parts get in the way, clients will sense that and they won't trust and they won't go deep. And so that's a common therapist mistake. In terms of clients, everything is grist for the mill. So it isn't like, here's one thing I could say. So sometimes in our eagerness to get to these exiles and heal them, we will bypass the protectors. Then they'll backlash afterwards. So let's say somebody comes in and they've got this intense pain in their gut. And so we try to go there right away and maybe even succeed in helping them be with this very vulnerable, childlike part that carries the pain. But because we didn't ask for permission from their protectors to get there, then their protectors give them a horrible headache during the week, or even worse sometimes. Or, I've had clients come in and say, "What are you doing to me? I've been sober for 20 years and now I want to go to the bar." So we've come to be able to help reassure clients that doesn't mean this is a horrible thing. It just means that we went too fast and we didn't do it with permission. So this is a kind of ecologically sensitive approach. So in general, we go to protectors first, not expecting them to change because they generally won't until what they protect has been healed. But we go to protectors sort of like you would to the military to honor them for their service, even the highly destructive ones, because we get that they're just trying to keep you safe, and find out about what they protect from the part and then negotiate permission to go to it And so we've gotten very good at, kind of bargaining. We know the common protector fears about letting us go to exiles. And so we know how to address each of those fears and get permission. And so ideally, there wouldn't be the backlash because we did this in an ecologically sensitive way.
Can you share any poignant examples where internal family systems had a major impact on someone's life?
Well, it's hard because there's just so many. I can talk about the schizophrenic kid that I presented at the conference. So he was 26 and had been paranoid since he was, he took some acid, LSD, before he graduated college and kept having these paranoid episodes, which would he would wind up in handcuffs and taken to hospitals and involuntarily 3 times. And just his life was a mess. He was living at home, not doing much. And so we had him find the parts we found first. One was a critic, this horrible critic that was really nasty to him. And the first session, we had him work with it and help it calm down and back off and trust him after it was honored, like I said, because it's just trying to keep him safe. And then we went to the part that gave him the paranoid episodes. At first, I had him ask why he did it. And of course, it said, because if I don't do it, you're going to die and your family's going to die. And, it said all the extreme things. But as we stayed with it and kept asking more questions of it, it turned out it was like any other protector. It was just trying to protect parts of them that had felt so ashamed from his father. Also, in its attempt to protect him, could make him think that people could read his mind. And so it's a long, elaborate story. But as we could honor that part even and get permission to go and heal the shame that it protected, that part now is called the vigilant part. It's no longer the paranoid part. And it just kind of keeps an eye on how things are going in the outside world and gives them advice. And so subsequent to that, he's quit smoking pot. He's quit smoking cigarettes. He's getting out of the house and applying for jobs. And, I have videos of him, and he just seems like a totally different kid. Before we worked with the paranoid part, he seemed totally flat and would hardly move when you would talk to him. And in the later sessions, he's just very animated and full of life. So that's just one example.
That's a great example. So if you had a magic wand and could improve one thing about the mental health system, what would it be?
It would be 2 things, if that's okay.
Sure.
One would be that they would quit encouraging people to battle with these parts that are causing them trouble. So, for example, I come from the eating disorder field where the state of the art is to teach eating disorder clients to defeat ED is the language, ED being eating disorder. And so you pit your client against the part that's trying to protect them by giving them anorexia or bulimia or whatever it is, which only makes those parts stronger. And ED will kick your ass. The death rate for anorexia is extremely high because anorexic parts will win. They'll kill you to save you. So that would be one, would be to honor instead of attack parts. And then the second would be to realize that the self is in there, that you don't have to teach clients how to deal with their emotions. And you don't have to do all this, what's called teaching grounding skills or affect regulation skills, that they already have a self in there that can do all that. It's just covered over, but it can be released. But to do that, the therapist has to be itself.
I agree. So how can my audience learn more about internal family systems, either online or in print?
Online is our website again is selfleadership.org. And on that website is a store in which there are many, many books and articles and meditation CDs and all kinds of stuff they can access.
Dr. Schwartz, on behalf of myself, my listeners, and all of the people that you've helped in your work, I want to thank you for your contributions to mental health treatment and for taking the time out of your busy schedule to help me and my audience better understand the field of internal family systems. And to my listeners, please be sure to check out my website, therapyshow.com, which has many resources about mental health. There you will also find how to submit questions, stories, or insights that you have about the mental health system, or suggestions about who else I can interview and how I can improve the show. I'd like to close by reminding our listeners to please subscribe, share, and review this podcast so that you, someone you love, and people around the world can gain more benefit from therapy. There is no need to suffer in silence. Get the help that you need to create the life that you want.